Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's second half. We are that much closer to Saturday Nightmares live from New York, our live stream. I hope to see you all there. Before we jump into tonight's second half, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they really do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into tonight's second half, shall we? Today's first encounter. When I was younger, my mom started taking my brother and I to church. I was in the second or third grade, and at this point I was pretty excited to go. My mom had us baptized, and we never missed a Sunday. Now fast forward to middle school, it was time to start going to confirmation camp. Basically, a week-long camp where we had fun and took a class a day. The camp is located in Pennsylvania, out past Dillsburg a ways. I remember all the apple orchards and how peaceful it seemed for a while. My third and final year of being a camper, that all changed. I was 14 years old, if memory serves me correctly. Everything went smooth the first few days. One morning, I woke up wrapped in my blanket. I walked to the main cabin. Once everybody was assembled, they would quit blasting the music to wake everyone up. After that, we would return to our cabins and get changed out of our PJs and file down for breakfast. I got to the mess hall and poured my usual morning hot cocoa, waiting for everyone to come in. 10 minutes later, I decided to check and see if the hot chocolate is drinkable temperature. I looked down, and there was a perfect 6 in the foam. I kind of froze for a second, just staring at it, not knowing what to make of it. I brushed it off after a few, thinking it was just a fluke, but in the back of my mind, an uneasy feeling lingered. Fast forward to midday now. We would go swimming down in the lower camp at the bottom of the hill and across the street. Afterwards, we took showers. By this time, I had pushed the earlier incident out of my head. So you can imagine my surprise when I looked down in the middle of my shower and saw another perfect 6 in the soap bubbles. I was horrified and confused. I had no idea what was going on. The rest of the day passed very uneasily. I wasn't sure where and when or even the next one would appear. Silly me, worrying about a 6. Before I tell you what happens next, I want to tell you about the cabins. They were built off of the ground on concrete stilts, basically. Behind the cabins was a drop-off, so I have absolutely no explanation for what happened next. It was dark at this point. We had just finished dinner, and my best friend and I popped back in so she could use the restroom before our activity hour. While I was waiting for her, I turned and found myself staring out the back window of the cabin. I immediately froze in fear. I was staring into glowing red eyes of a huge black dog walking towards me. There's no logical explanation for this because, as I said, the ground dropped off behind the cabin. When I heard the sink running, it broke my trance of fear long enough that I was able to walk to where I couldn't see it anymore. I didn't say anything about it to my friend or anyone else. Everywhere I looked for the rest of the night, I would see a twisted demonic face. Before bed, I had a counselor help me put up the wooden window covers. and they stayed that way for the rest of the week. It didn't stop completely, but it did put a dent in it. My second to last day, I was walking out of the cabin and noticed halfway up a tree there was a girl. She looked to be about 12, and she was hanging from the tree with a noose around her neck. She was muddy, gray and white and transparent, wearing a nightgown from way back. I stared at her for a while, afraid, not knowing what to do, until finally she vanished as quickly as she appeared. At this point I was breaking down. I thought I was going crazy. So when the day came for my mom to pick me up, I couldn't be any happier. I was home for 3 days before I knew it wasn't over. Walking through my kitchen in the middle of the day, something caught my eye. I looked out the kitchen window and saw a shadow figure standing there staring at me, as if it was telling me there was no escaping. After that, life kind of took a turn for the worst. My dad fell into addiction, harder than he had ever been before. And when I was 18, my mom passed away due to complications to 2 cancers she was fighting. I often wonder if it was just coincidence, or if that week of camp, and whatever may have attached itself to me, had a hand in all of this. All I know is that I try to live my life not looking over my shoulder. Thank you for taking the time to read this. In a way, it kind of feels good to get it off of my chest after all of this time. Today's second encounter. On Christmas Day of 2016, I was participating in a gift exchange with my mom and her boyfriend's family. Long story short, I ended up getting this pretty good bottle of vanilla-flavored whiskey. I'd like to add that this took place in northern Alberta, where it's pretty secluded and cold this time of year. And I do mean cold. Now, to the real story. So, towards the end of the day, I decided to go have myself a fire and a taste of my new whiskey at our dugout just down the road. I was there hanging out for about an hour by myself, and everything was normal as usual. It was a dark and starry night, hardly a breeze in the woods. And it's quiet with the exception of the occasional vehicle passing on the highway right beside the area. I finally decided to crack open the hooch and mix myself a whiskey and cola. As I'm sipping my drink, the flames of the fire die down, as most of the wood was burnt up. So I add a log or two and begin to blow the embers to raise the flames. As I blow, I hear this loud, percussive knock. Not cracking, not popping, but a knock. Wood on wood, no mistake about it. I estimate the sound to be roughly within 20 yards, as it was crystal clear and loud. My heart is beating 1,000,000 miles an hour, and my grip tightens around my utility shovel, the only protection tool I had. I remain as still as possible with my head facing the blackness of the woods, where I heard that knock. I have no flashlight to shine in the area aside from my iPhone light, which was useless. I wait for whoever or whatever to make a move. I'm convinced that somehow someone stopped on the highway and snuck out behind me without noticing, and was trying to mess with me. I should add that my town is quite rough. A lot of criminal activity happens here. Thievery, robberies, and occasional shooting, as there's a decent amount of crazy folk up here. So as I'm waiting for whoever or whatever to make their move, I consider yelling out, "Who's there?" I resist that urge, however, as I was so amped up that if someone was to answer my call, I was sure that I would charge and seriously injure or kill that person out of fear. So I sit it out quietly for a few minutes and just listen. After about 2 minutes without hearing anything, I decided to pack up. I very gently and slowly gathered my cup, whiskey bottle, and garbage, put it into my backpack, and made my way to my quad, all the while listening and watching that same area. The quad was parked about 5 yards ahead of me in the direction of the knock. As I turn on my quad, the lights are shining in that direction. I took a quick look into the woods ahead of me to see if I could notice anything out there. Nothing. So I hightail it out of there and quickly park the quad in the garage and head inside for bed. I get up the next day and head out back there to look for tracks, as it had snowed Christmas Day. A fresh, new 1.5-inch blanket of snow covered the land, and I was convinced that I'd find tracks of whoever or whatever made that knock. I walk over to the area and see nothing, so I decide to circle the whole dugout, just to be sure there was nothing. I didn't see a single disturbance in the snow, aside from my own tracks. Not even a rabbit track. I was completely alone out there. I tried to come up with an explanation, but none would make sense to me, except for one. One, a person, no footprints. I would have heard their steps crunching in the snow trying to sneak up. 2, an animal, no tracks. What animal can grab a piece of wood and knock it against a tree? 3, trees freezing, thawing. Whatever there's a freeze-thaw cycle, moisture in the trees would cause popping and cracking sounds. Sound was clearly a knock and much too loud. Number 4, a big branch falling and hitting a fallen log, causing the knock. Would have heard the branch fall off, and it would have made additional sounds to the knocking. Number 5, Sasquatch. Although I do believe these woods are my home, I grew up in them. I rarely see bears, let alone a Sasquatch. And 6, a spirit. I think someone from this life, either my dog, outdoor companion, or my grandmother, was telling me to go home right now, or you're not getting out of here alive. Although I didn't plan on getting drunk, I am a lightweight, and possibly me getting drunk and nodding off was a serious possibility. Also, this was the first time I ever drank in those woods. I've been out at night 1,000,000 times before, and never had anything like this happen until I brought booze. I'd like to finish the story by informing everyone that I lost a friend about a year after this incident due to drinking and freezing to death. I can't help but think of the wild, crazy theories that it was him from the future. I'm sure he'd laugh at this theory. I miss that bastard. Number 3. I'd like to thank you for your YouTube channel and relate to you a few experiences with what possibly is a Dogman. For me, I think these experiences are sacred. I call them wolf people or wolf men. I've shared one experience with another researcher, and I think it would be a possibly more positive side. I would like to share with you about these beings. All these experiences occurred in southern Africa. Let me start at the beginning. We lived in a small mining town, and the area was semi-wild at that stage. Our family home had a large garden, and it was filled densely with thick bush and trees. My family, although South African, still believed in fairies and sacred plants, as one would if your ancestors came from Europe 100 years ago. As a result, we had hawthorns and oak tree and various other plants that were meant to protect you from bad energies. Anyway, one night when I was 5, I heard and saw a wolf man in my mind. He called me in my mind. He told me that I needed to leave the house and walk slowly around the entire perimeter of this huge, scary garden. It was very late at night, and I remember having trouble reaching the door handle on the back door because I was very tiny as a child, and then once successful, being able to sneak out. He told me they were there to test me. He said that if I could walk around by myself slowly and not panic and run screaming, it would mean that I had a warrior spirit. I know, this sounds nuts. Anyway, I started to slowly walk in the pitch black by myself, and I reached the area where the oak trees grew. I could see a group of wolf people standing there watching me. When I recall this episode, I see a very large, pitch black, long-furred wolf man standing in front of the others. Maybe there were 3 or 4 others behind him. He seemed to be watching me very carefully. His eyes glowed. I managed not to scream and run even though I really wanted to, and I had made my way all the way back to the kitchen door. I knew that I was being followed and watched, and even if I ran the last few feet to the back door, it would mean I had failed the test. My heart was beating so fast and I was shaking with fear, but I felt like I had passed the test. Now, South Africa is a very dangerous country. We have a high crime rate. As a woman, you would need to be on constant guard against being attacked. One day, I was 26 or so, I'm 49 now. I couldn't find my cat. I was living in a suburban area and went out into the street to look for my cat. It was very early in the morning and the streets were empty. Then this guy that was walking up the road saw me and suddenly changed direction and started walking towards me rapidly. His body language didn't seem to be one of love and light. He reached me and was full in my private body space, and this was both threatening and frightening to me. And this part I just find hard to explain. But I turned and felt this immense surge of that wolfman spirit course through me. It was like I was being temporarily overshadowed by the wolfman energy. I turned and snarled and growled at my potential attacker. I bared my teeth like the wolfman. I growled a low, slow growl. I could feel my eyes not being human. That is all I did, growled and snarled and bared my teeth. My potential attacker half screamed, half shouted. His face was full of terror, and he turned and ran away. I shouted, "Hey, come back!" And that just made him run even faster. I know, this sounds bizarre, until the next thing happened. I was 28, living in Swaziland on a farm with not the best water system. I came down with odd symptoms and ended up in a hospital in South Africa. They told me that I had to have an emergency appendectomy. I knew the symptoms were more than just my appendix, and against my intuition, went along with the surgeon's insistence that I would be immediately operated on. It turned out to be typhoid, by the way. This is important because of what happened. The emergency surgery had to be done late at night. The hospital surgery area was empty except for me lying on a gurney, waiting to be prepped for surgery. I didn't have any pre-meds yet, so I knew I was not a drug-induced hallucination. There was no one around. And suddenly, a giant black wolf man from my childhood was walking up the corridor on his back legs. Let me describe him. He was around 7 feet tall. He had long, pitch-black fur. He had enormous shoulders and a thin waist and well-built thighs. He had hands, not paws, and his eyes were a magnificent golden yellow. He seemed old, but still fierce. I don't recall his ears being unusual other than being like Alsatians. I could see the pink skin, where the fur on his chest was more sparse. He walked up to me on the gurney, and I can say that I was horrified, confused, and my brain was scrambled. He leaned over me and told me telepathically that I was in a situation I was in because I hadn't followed my instincts. He said that I better start following my instincts or I would be dead in 5 years. He said he would protect me through what was to come, but I had better start listening to my instincts. I rapidly agreed with him, just nodding. He was frightening, stern, and authoritative. He then turned and walked back down the corridor. I was stunned. Why did no one else see him? I decided to think of these 3 encounters as simply deeply embedded archetypes, and that they were reflections of my own inner landscapes, born from growing up in a family that believed in fairies and sacred plants. Until I found out about Dogman. The thing is, what your listeners describe the Dogman to look like 7 feet tall, pitch black fur, hands, long snout, yellow eyes, standing on its back legs is exactly what my wolfman looks like. exact same guy. Are they capable of walking 2 dimensions? Have we lost our ability? Are they waiting for us to reawaken our instincts? I firmly believe that there is a guardian element to them. I think of them as a guardian of the wild places. I once heard that a wolfman used to fight alongside of ancient queens and kings in Europe against foes. In the old days, queens and kings had to have the ability to talk to their lands. A king or queen needed to be able to work with the land and nature to keep it fertile. If a king or queen didn't have that ability, they were dethroned. Is it possible that Wolfman remembers those ancient pacts? Does the Wolfman remember when we protected the lands together? Does Wolfman recognize the ancestors of those ancient kings and queens and follows them? Are they waiting for us to remember to live with nature? These are questions I ask myself often. Once you have these kind of experience, your entire reality changes. Thank you for reading this. Today's 4th part of the upload. Okay, so this first part is my friend's story. So during the time these things took place, we were all high school students. This all happened in Florida, by the way. I already knew about skinwalkers and the like, but when these things happened to me, I wasn't sure if it really was a skinwalker or something else. I've noticed that most people who tell me they've experienced the same phenomena live in the area that I do, and my friend is no exception. Let's call this friend Jay. Jay lives maybe 10 minutes away from me. She told me that in her bus, there's this one area they drive by to drop this kid off. She said she doesn't know why, but it gives her the creeps. Well, she told me that early one morning, so it was still dark outside, when they were driving in the area to pick him up, all the kids in the bus and the driver saw this weird-ass deer running along the bus. It didn't run away from the bus. Instead, it ran beside it. She said it looked weird as hell. You know, the usual shit about it looked like some humanoid deer, 'cause it just didn't look right. Like its limbs were bent in an awkward way, and she said its eyes were freaky. Thing is, my friend didn't know jack about skinwalkers or any of that mumbo-jumbo. So I basically got the chills. I tried being reasonable, though, because, maybe she just saw a regular deer, and since it was dark, she got confused. Besides, it's Florida. I don't think we're supposed to get that type of stuff down here. However, Jay swore up and down that it wasn't like a normal deer. She said they all saw it, and the bus driver even slowed down to get a better look at it, because everyone was weirded out by it. And it was basic pandemonium. After a while, it ran off and disappeared. Jay couldn't have made this up because, like I said, she didn't know anything about skinwalkers or the goat man or whatever it could have been. Anyway, I get freaked out because here I am knowing about skinwalkers, goatmans, etc., and my friend is clueless, thinking she's just telling me a regular story about a freaky deer demon. So I asked her, "Do you know what skinwalkers are?" She just looked at me and said, "What's that?" I Googled her and showed her the descriptions of skinwalker, and she goes, "Yeah, that's what I saw, except it had the head of a deer." She kept saying it didn't look like an animal or a human, and that after a while the kid from that bus stop didn't come back, although that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this, unless you want to go wild with what might have happened to him. So we were freaking out together because what she said reminded me a lot about what I heard at night, about it not being animal or human. See, a couple of years before she told me this story, I found myself one night sitting in my backyard, like really early, maybe 3 a.m. or so, because I was thinking about things due to personal reasons. I was just kind of chilling and enjoying the silence when all of a sudden I hear this really freaky echoing scream from really far away. The only way I can describe it is as if it was a woman and a cat were trapped together inside of a bag and screaming like they were about to get murdered. I know mountain lions, foxes, and owls are a thing, and they make the weirdest noise when they're mating. But I've looked that shit up, trying to debunk it myself, and it didn't sound anything like it. Like, usually you'd be able to tell if it was an animal. It's just common sense. Like my friend said before, the stuff didn't sound animal or human. It sounded really unnatural and weird. Now, me being me, I was pretty unfazed at first. A little concerned, yeah. Like at first, it was really far away, and I thought it was a woman. And I actually thought they'd be killing people in the streets at 3 a.m. The thing is that shit traveled fast. It was freaky, and it got closer, and the more weird and unnatural it sounded. It only took me a couple of seconds to realize that it wasn't a woman, and it wasn't a cat. While this was going down, I was going through my head like, what is this? This thing went from sounding like it was a couple of miles away, from being in my neighbor's yard in under 5 seconds. It was so weird. 1 second it sounded far away, the next it was on my street. I almost shit myself. The second I stood up to leave, the scream just stopped. Like it was dead-ass stop. And I'm really thinking at this point, it's in front of my house. I walked as calmly as possible back inside, locked the doors, and the scream was back to being far away again. That's weird. I've also heard scraping and tapping on my windows some night, usually around the same time. I'd say 2 to 4 in the morning, and seen black figures that weren't affected by light outside of my house. To add detail to these things, so you can get the feel for it, basically what happened is that I was doing a project for class, and since I procrastinate like a pro, I'm up until 2 in the morning. I go to wash my hands from all of the graphite, and as the water's running, I hear scraping against one of the bathroom doors that leads to my backyard. Now, most of the door is made up of this glass panel that kind of made everything look like a bunch of blurry globs if you try to see out of it. And for a split second, I thought I noticed something pointy and ash gray scraping against the window. It almost looked ghost-like. I turn off the water and wait a minute, and it comes back, scrapes again. Now I'm trying to not freak out, but my hands are shaking. It's stupid, but I actually whispered, "What are you doing?" While my voice trembled, it stopped, and I didn't hear anything except for what sounded like someone walking by the window in my room every now and then. It continued that way for some nights as well. Off and on, I would be hearing footsteps by my window, and even a tap or two some nights. Sometimes I just ignored them, and other times I looked out to see if someone was there. But there was no one there ever. Another night, I had been outside in my backyard again after having a rough day. It was maybe 3 or so in the morning. I'm sitting outside on the trampoline, just relaxing. I suddenly notice it's absolutely quiet. Like that kind of uneasy silence that almost feels like a vacuum. I get this feeling of dread, like I'm being watched, and I snap my head to the left and catch a glimpse of a humanoid black figure ducking under the other side of my fence immediately. I'm a little freaked out because I noticed this thing was pure black. Like the streetlight nearby didn't hit it at all. It almost looked cartoony, if that makes any sense. It's like the laws of physics just didn't apply to this thing. Now see, the reason I'm ranting about this is that I told both friends and my own story in psychology class at the same school. A lot of kids there live around my area. I mean, like 5 to maybe 15 minutes away, max. And they all started screaming, and the entire class went batshit crazy when I finished, because apparently they've all experienced the same stuff. One girl told me she also heard tapping on her windows at night and heard the screams. It freaked me out because she explained it the same way I did. She said it sounded like a woman or a cat, but really not like either. Another one of my friends who lives really close by told me she saw dark figures in the woods and heard the screaming. Pretty much everyone has heard the screaming. It sounded the same. That's the thing, in a completely different time frame. That's what weird, because everyone's voice sounds different. So how could she describe the same exact thing I did? You know, like if people were really killing each other out there. None of us thought it was an animal either. We all then agreed that at that point our town was haunted, but I don't know. I mean, if there's any animal that sounds like that, I want to know, because that stuff didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before. So I want to be enlightened. The only person I've ever heard who's seen anything remotely specific is my first friend from art, who went on the bus, and apparently it's like really bad to talk about skinwalkers, or even worse if you see them. It's like bad mojo. Those things are said to be able to travel very quickly, so thinking about that made it seem that was what I experienced. I experienced a skinwalker. I hope there's a logical explanation. I also asked a coworker who was also my friend in high school and lives nearby as well. He got all spooked and said he's seen and heard the same things. He's very spiritual and often has visions. He told me that he believes they are doing dark magic in the woods because of a dream he had about some hooded group sacrificing a woman and a cat or something like that. Which is freaky because it also turns out that behind our local dog park, there's a patch of woods with shifty shit in there. I was shown this by an acquaintance during my freshman year who lives a couple streets away. Down the path in the woods, after some time of walking, there's this huge cross just smack dab in the middle of nowhere. It's basically raw, crooked-ass wood nailed together into a cross with a rope hanging from where you would put your hands if you were getting crucified. It's huge as well, and whenever I decide to check it out, I always got that uneasy feeling. Like this feeling that if you stay too long, something bad will happen. It doesn't look like a grave, to be honest, but who knows. Anyway, he says I'm not the first person that he knows who's told him about experiencing things like this. He also told me he had his own experience with some sort of humanoid. He says he once saw one and it turned and looked at him directly in the eyes, as if immediately knew what it was thinking. So basically, we don't mess with the woods anymore. All right, folks, I hope you all enjoyed this very strange and yet terrifying upload. As much as I enjoyed sharing it with you, I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that helps the channel to continue to grow and go, and honestly, what gives people a place to share their experiences, ideas, and theories, judgment and ridicule-free, simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.